It's approximately 5 a.m. on the Monday, April 19th, 1943, when German SS soldiers and auxiliary troops attacked the Warsaw Ghetto. They were met with gunfire and grenades from Jewish fighters of the ZOB, the Jewish Fighting Organization. It was the day of Erev Pesach. In the heroic letter that Mordechai Anielewicz, the acknowledged leader of the uprising, sent to his friend and co-commander Yitzhak Antek Zukerman, he wrote, "The dream of my life has come true. Defense in the ghetto has become a fact. Armed Jewish resistance and revenge are actually happening." At that time, Yitzhak Antek Zukerman was outside of the ghetto on the Aryan side, but this was not a matter of his own choosing. The ZOB sent him out 3 days prior to the uprising to maintain communication with the Polish underground, secure weapons, and prepare escape routes and hiding places. After the brutal destruction of the ghetto, which took almost a month rather than the 2 to 3 days the Nazis were expecting, he would help organize the escape of a relatively small number of survivors, perhaps a few dozen, through Warsaw's sewers. Zukerman's fellow resistance leader and future wife, Sivia Lubetkin, was instrumental in leading people out this way, and she was one of the last fighters to escape. Exactly 5 years later, on April 19th, 1948, also a Monday, it was Zukerman who would be the primary speaker at the unveiling of Natan Rappaport's memorial to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which you've just seen. First came the mourner's Kaddish, then the actual unveiling of the monument, followed by Zukerman's speech in front of an estimated 10,000 plus people. This was followed by other speakers, and then a chorus of about 250 orphan Jewish children who sang battle songs and partisan hymns, including Zog nicht kein Mal, often translated as "Never say you have reached the final road." These were his opening words. The uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto has entered Jewish history. Our generation, and especially those who took part in the uprising, now bear the responsibility of providing an answer to the younger generation of Jewish historians. We must pass on to the future generations the true history of both the idea of the uprising and the uprising itself. We must not falsify this tragic and heroic history, written in blood and tears. It should be conveyed as it actually was. First, he represented the uprising as the outcome of a difficult internal dispute inside the ghetto, as early as July 1942, when the deportations to Treblinka began. The conciliatory segment of the leadership hoped survival was still possible through accommodations with the Germans, providing skills and labor that they would need to conduct the war. The ZOB segment, on the other hand, concluded that the Nazis were carrying out a deliberate extermination program and that armed resistance was the only reasonable response. He said, "If we had not responded to the Germans with armed resistance at these earlier stages, we would have perished without firing a single shot." He also described the dispute inside the ZOB over how to resist, whether to fight only where conditions were most favorable or to wage a continuous struggle wherever possible, including outside the ghetto. He tied this to the broader concept of Jewish resistance, not just a last stand in one place. He stressed that the fighters had no delusions about their chances. They understood the revolt was militarily hopeless, especially by April 1943, when there were only about 40,000 of the 400,000 Jews in the ghetto at its maximum. Zukerman defined the revolt as a struggle for dignity and national honor, stating, "The authentic historical idea of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was not a fight aimed at achieving a strategic military objective. Rather, it was a fight for the honor of the Jewish people, a fight for a dignified death." This is how we understood the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto on April 1943. And in this lies the greatness of the idea of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, not only for Jewish history, but for the history of humanity as a whole. The resistance leader insisted that the uprising was fought not only against the Germans, but for enduring Jewish dignity and continuity. He declared that the Jewish people exist and they will continue to exist. In that sense, the revolt was for the living, for the honor of the murdered, and for the history of humanity as a whole. Only 25 days later, at 4 p.m. on May 14, 1948, speaking from Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, declared the state of Israel. The British mandate would expire at midnight that night. Ben-Gurion invoked the massacre of millions of Jews and affirmed the right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate. At that time, Zukerman and his wife were already living in Israel, likely listening to the announcement on the radio. 11 minutes after the declaration, US President Harry Truman was the first world leader to recognize Israel as a legitimate Jewish state. By the next morning, Egypt had begun to attack, and the Jewish people were engaged in another war, this time to preserve their right to their ancestral homeland. May the memory of those who were killed in the Warsaw Ghetto and those who lived on forever be a blessing, as well as the precious memory of our 6 million brothers and sisters who were killed and those who survived the Shoah. And may God bless all who continue to fight for the preservation of Eretz Yisrael. Am Yisrael Chai.